Alright, guys, I'm just waiting to get Rocco back on here. One moment. We're going to be doing a talk about modern monetary theory and some other good, interesting stuff, so just bear with me a moment here. And we will get started. Hey, Kenny. We're going to be doing a talk about economics here. There is Rocco. So we're going to bring him on now.
Yo,
Hey
there
man,
you are.
cool. So
I could barely hear you. You're a little bit low. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. All right. So how's everybody doing? How you doing, cuz?
I'm doing pretty good and really excited to go through some stuff.
Yeah, me too, man.
Education.
I'm dying to get this information out because it's just simple logic. Anybody can, understand it. You don't need to be a PhD. You don't need to be an expert. You need to be an American. You need to be willing to participate in our democracy. That's it.
Yes,
We have all the power collectively, but we have to be able to defeat the mainstream lies and scare tactics that keep us divided, and fighting against our own public interests. So where do you
all
want to
right.
start?
Well, I don't know. I guess why don't you give a little bit of your background? I know we were gonna try and get to the point of MMT. I don't really know the best way to lead into that. I definitely would also like to hear about your stance on UBI versus federal job guarantee. I think both of those things are stuff most people might not even understand at all. Um, you're
Yeah,
usually
yeah,
correcting me on those things, so
yeah, these are big points, and it's real easy to, be led astray into for good people to even become counterproductive to progress, and not even realize it. So it's real important that we take the time to look at these things and apply logic and think them through and have, productive dialogue to help each other, think about things in a different way. So,
absolutely.
my name's Rocco Millon. I have my own group and page, Nonpartisans for Progress. I have a dedicated core of people that help me, and we make it a group to educate and empower the public so that we can ultimately, collectively force our government to satisfy our Constitution and the public purpose. And so what I like to get everybody to understand, and I'm a disabled veteran. I'm not an expert. I did learn from the best, and look up people like Dr. Stephanie Kelton, Dr. Fidel Kaboob, Ellis Winningham, Dr. Bill Mitchell, Dr. Stephen Hale. These are the people that I learned from. I studied them for hours and hours and hours, hours and hours and hours. And so anybody could do it. Anyone could look it up. But what I'm going to do today is just blow up some of the mainstream lies and scare tactics with
Let's
simple
do it.
logic that anybody can, think through. So what I like to start to do is say, America per the Constitution is, democratic socialism. Our government, in fact, government for, of, and by the people is socially owned government for the public purpose, for the general welfare and common defense. That's our public purpose. So a socially owned government for our public purpose, that is democratic socialism. And when people use fair tactics and they misrepresent what socialism even is, it makes it hard to have a productive discussion. So we have to remember, per our Constitution, government is the supreme authority, and we are all dependent on our federal government. If you have a job that pays you dollars or you have income that's denominated in dollars, then you're always completely dependent on the federal government to indefinitely spend dollars so that you can maintain your paid employment or income denominated in dollars. So we're all dependent on our currency issuer and regulatory authority, which is Congress. How it spends, taxes, and regulates creates and organizes our capitalist economy. That determines how a capitalist economy even works. How so that's central planning in reality. We have a central planned government. Nobody even owns land in America. We all pay rent. We all pay tax. So just like communist China, even after you pay tax, you do everything right. The federal government can take any land it wants if it needs it for the general welfare. It takes Native American ancient burial ground for oil wells. It takes people's land over a border wall. It takes your land. People lose their land over stadiums for games. So nobody owns land in America. It's a myth. The government owns everything, and we're all dependent on the government for indefinite interference, as the right wing would call it. Where the government freedom only exists as a social achievement. Freedom is not a property of the individual. It only exists as a social achievement, by the collective. So what you need to understand is this, all right? Our government, we have a sovereign government that issues its own currency. So we have monetary sovereignty in America. So what that means is our government is never dependent on revenue or the credit markets to spend and operate. Our Constitution, our Article 1, Section 8, it mandates that Congress mint and tax to provide for our general welfare and our common defense. So what that means is our federal government, as the currency issuer, needs to spend the dollars required, provisioning society with all the real resources that are essential to exist in perpetuity. You need to have a smart population, a healthy population, a protected population. So you need to have a military, you need to have top-notch public education, top-notch public health care, you need to have roads, sanitation systems. These are all things, real resources that our federal government must provide for America to exist in perpetuity. That's the point of the Constitution, to make sure that America can stand the test of time and that its populations can meet our needs of tomorrow. We can't do that, with our current right-wing neoliberal status quo, which seeks to privatize our public space and deregulate everything. From the 70s in America, both parties teamed up to kill the full employment policies of the New Deal. That ushered in our right-wing neoliberal status quo. This is marked by our federal government targeting 5% unemployment, starving our economy of dollars, targeting 5% unemployment, and cutting and privatizing essential public goods and services. So what that actually does is it creates starvation wages. Over time, the majority of Americans don't make enough dollars to get their basic needs met. They don't make enough dollars to buy what they produce. So the majority in America have starvation wages. They can't, even people that are making $100,000 a year, if they get sick, if a loved one gets cancer, they're $1 million in the hole in a month. So really, the majority of Americans are precarious. And what people don't get about this is those starvation wages are created by our federal government, starving our economy of dollars. Because think about this. If our government's the currency issuer, the only one who makes dollars, spends them into existence, creates unemployment through taxation. Think about that. Our government needs a way to provision society with all these real resources like a military and public goods and services. How does it do it? How does it make its population stop living off the land, living off the vegetables in the garden, hunting, and instead work for the general welfare of society? And it used to be slavery was a big part of that. We don't do that anymore in a civilized society. Now they use taxation and spending. So taxes don't fund our federal government. Our federal government funds taxpayers who then pay tax. But our government imposes taxation on us in the private sector to create unemployment. If you are living off your land and all of a sudden government puts a tax on you and your land that must be paid, now you can't live off the garden. Even if you have the ability to, you have to at least sell some of your goods and labor to get the dollars required to satisfy your tax obligation and stay free and keep your assets. So that is called unemployment. When you're willing to sell your goods and labor, now you're unemployed, and now government through federal spending can provision society with the essentials like a military and roads or whatever. That's the basic mechanism that our federal government uses to provision society, to make sure we can exist in perpetuity. Do you want to hone in anywhere? Where are you understanding what I'm saying?
So far, yeah, and it seems everyone's really enjoying it so far, and getting it. If you
Great. So
keep going,
if our government creates unemployment with taxation, then it's the government's job to maintain true full employment, because it would never be in the public interest for our government to force people to stop living off the land and then to force the 5% of them to not be able to get the dollars they need to have paid employment. If we have, in other words, if we have unemployment present, it's always because our currency issuing federal government is refusing to spend the dollars required to maximize their productive capacity with paid employment. And that's especially sadistic when you consider that America is crumbling all around us. Schools are crumbling, infrastructure, sewers are crumbling, poisoning our river every time it rains. We have to transition into green energy. We have so much work. Elderly centers are understaffed. We have all this work that needs done, and our federal government is targeting 5% unemployment. That's forcing millions of people to be unemployed, regardless of their job skills. They could have the best job skills. The whole population could have the best job skills. Every single person could have the most personal responsibility. Because our government targets that 5% unemployment, it doesn't matter. They would still be forcing millions of people to be unemployed and poor. So involuntary unemployment is a systemic abuse that cannot be fixed with personal responsibility. Even if one person gets more job skills and somehow beats out somebody else for their living wage job, then that person's out of a living wage job, or they're working poor. You know what I mean? So either way, it's a systemic problem that would be with society. The only way to deal with that is for our government to target true full employment, which was the normal. That was norm for America. Our Federal Reserve, as I was telling you earlier, is
yeah,
mandated by Congress to target full employment and to deal with price stability. It only deals with price stability. Now they convince the population that targeting 5% unemployment and forcing millions of people to be poor and unemployed is somehow necessary to have a good economy. Somehow, to have a good
crazy.
economy, we must be able to keep 5% so desperate that they're willing to work for starvation wages. All right, so that drives all wages down. That's why we see, if you look at a productivity chart from the 70s, you'll see that's where our wages and product 70s, that all changed because our government stopped targeting that true full employment. Instead, they started targeting unemployment, targeting inequality. That's, unemployment, neoliberalism, starving our economy of dollars, and that creates starvation wages, which forces us into private credit. Now, this is the kicker. Because these starvation wages, for the majority, we don't make enough dollars to get our basic needs met. So we're forced into record amounts of private debt just to get our basic needs met. Credit cards for milk and eggs, credit for healthcare, credit for education, credit for transportation, credit for everything, to live a precarious existence. And because private credit always dries up, it's unsustainable because we need income. We can't make our own dollars as people, as individuals. So private debt is a real burden for us. Okay, now public debt for the government, it's nothing like private debt. Public debt for the government, because it makes its own dollars, when it spends those dollars into existence, that's public debt, but that's our asset. Those are dollars in existence that we're able to earn and save. You know what I mean? So the government's debt is our asset in reality. Personal debt is our burden, and we're only vulnerable to personal private debt when the government starves us of dollars in public debt, targeting unemployment and cutting and privatizing public goods and services. So anyway, because we're all forced into this record right now, even in this great economy, we have record amounts of this personal private debt, It's so unsustainable, it creates these booms and bust cycles. And when it busts, our federal government as the currency issuer, it has to move back into a huge federal deficit position anyway to bail out the top. And so it's sadistic and it's artificial scarcity. Instead, we need our currency issuing government to deficit spend enough up front, targeting a balanced economy with true full employment, spending enough dollars up front to buy up every unemployed person and put them to work rebuilding America in green, sustainable ways that meets people's needs with essential public goods and services. Right now, America is paying people to be unemployed. We pay them not to work through unemployment insurance, welfare, food stamps. It's a half measure. It's not enough for these people to live anyway. They're forced onto the black market and credit. Instead, if you give these people a living wage job, now they got enough money to live well, and they're contributing to society. They're raising people's living standards with public goods and services. You know, their productive value goes up. Right now, their productive value is zero. You know, we can give them a living wage job, say, hanging out with elderly people, helping them around the house. That's raising people's living standards. That's making them productive members of society. And when you that helps a society recover, you know, that'll drastically reduce suicides, addiction, so many things that are associated with unemployment that we don't consider. You know, when you think about, like, right now they're talking about this $93 trillion price tag on the Green New Deal and the federally guaranteed living wage job program.
Okay,
And they're
cool.
saying,
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little about that.
yeah, they're saying, wait 1 minute, buddy. My son's waking up. There's food in the kitchen. You could go eat. I'm doing an interview with this guy. I'll be with you in a minute. But right now they want us all scared, and they're trying to scare us off the sticker price of this $93 trillion. What they are not looking at and what they don't want you to look at, that $93 trillion is actually far cheaper than doing nothing at all. All right. And if you break it down, individual programs, healthcare, for instance, healthcare for all, that is cheaper. If we give everybody single payer healthcare, that ends up being trillions of dollars cheaper than if we do nothing at all and leave the system exactly as it is. So, and yet they'll come out and they'll say, oh, well, healthcare for all costs $32 trillion over 10 years. Where are you going to pay for that? Doing nothing at all costs $36 trillion over 10 years. Where would you have paid for that? The same way. Government makes a law and dollars are spent into existence. That's how all federal spending is done. The federal government never uses any kind of revenue to spend. And if you think about it, how could it? It's the currency issuer. How taxes can't even be collected until the government first spends dollars into existence. So how on earth would you say that taxes could fund your federal government? It doesn't even make sense. Think about sitting down at a game for Monopoly with all your buddies. Yeah. And you got to start the game of Monopoly. You say, okay, all the players got to pay us rent so we could fund the bank and start the game of Monopoly. It's just impossible. It doesn't work like that. The bank has to issue money before rents can be later taken. It's the same with our government. Our federal government has to spend dollars into existence before taxes could be taken back or before bonds could be sold. This is a fact. On the gold standard, I know you might have some savvy listeners who may say, well, on the gold standard, you know, we did use revenues. And we did, but we used revenues on the gold standard not to fund the currency issuing federal government. We used revenues on the gold standard to protect the fixed exchange rate of gold. All right, so we had a fixed exchange rate of gold. If we created more dollars than we had in gold, then it would devalue the price of every dollar. So that made a limit to our federal spending. So to combat that, our government would use tax revenues and bond sales revenues to increase federal spending without increasing the net money supply and devaluing the dollar. So it wasn't about, the revenues weren't used under the gold standard to fund the federal government. They were used to protect the fixed exchange rate of gold, which we no longer have. So that practice no longer serves that function. The only thing bond sales do now is clear aggregate demand. They help the government, like World War II. everybody had good jobs. The whole nation was mobilized, and everyone had good jobs. They were all producing for the war effort. Appliance manufacturers, they stopped making TVs and refrigerators and started helping with the war effort. And all this production went overseas to the war effort. Well, that left all the people in America still with these good jobs, having good money, but there was no production to buy because it was all going to the war effort. So if they would have all started spending their money and demanding production that wasn't there, we would have had hyperinflation, inflation problems. So to combat that, our government said, hey, be patriotic and buy these war bonds. And that was to make the population postpone their consumption so that those dollars would not be demanding products that weren't there. Now they're sitting in a bond tied up for a few years until after the war, and then production returns to normal. So that was how a big way the government controlled the inflationary pressures of World War II. It wasn't to fund the war like people think. Oh, they sold war bonds to fund the government. No, the government went to war first. It sold war bonds after to take money out of the economy so that the people couldn't spend dollars on products that weren't available because all the production was going to fight the war. Now I jumped around a bit. I got a lot, so I don't know where we stopped, where the people are. Is there any questions that they have or anything so far? Or any specific points that I could explain in greater detail?
Jessica Close said, what about the unneeded, unwanted, unnecessary aid being forced on Venezuela in order to start a war for oil while there was no aid for Puerto Rico and in every state of the U.S. right now for homeless, sick, veterans, and crumbling schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Jessica. I'm completely against it, and we have a history in the United States of teaming up with right-wing terrorists worldwide, whether it be Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, Pinochet in Chile, the Contras. The list goes on and on and on. And so what we're doing in Venezuela is no different. We actually got Elliot Abrams, and he was the one, doing death squads in Latin America, and they're doing it again now. So, and Bernie Sanders is calling that out, and right now, he can't go too far with it, but he is calling it out, and he isn't supporting the opposition, because he knows America's history, and so I think we have to stop. But we don't need that oil. People need to understand that that's for-profit imperialism. That's not an operational necessity. That's a political choice to make the oligarchs money, plain and simple. And we collectively allow it. Listen, we've had the technology in America to be green and clean for a long time. And the fossil fuel companies have suppressed that. And they have got the majority of Americans to, scoff at the idea of transitioning away from fossil fuels onto greener and more sustainable energy sources. But we have that technology available. In fact, Trump right now is putting tariffs on solar panels so that to keep fossil fuels more competitive. Why on earth do we want to keep fossil fuels competitive? And they should have been obsolete a long time ago. We need to be paying Venezuela to keep their oil in the ground and helping them develop sustainable green energy. We need to be helping them facilitate true democracy, not destroying democracy by, arming and funding right-wing terrorists who want to, exploit the masses and empower the oligarchs.
Okay, so we have several people here from France that would like to hear your thoughts on their situation.
Yeah, the yellow vest. Well, first of all, thank you all for standing up and showing us how it's done in America. I have a meme I always share, and it says, in America, we act like the French are cowards and this and that, but that joke doesn't exist outside of America. In fact, in the rest of the world, they look at America and they laugh, looking at a free people that willingly gives up its rights for fear of communism, fear of drugs, fear of race, fear. So really we are the joke in America, and we need to be looking at the yellow vests in France and standing in solidarity with you. That's why I got this on with you right now, people. You are an inspiration. Don't think what you're doing goes unnoticed. Believe me, we're paying attention. We hold all the power collectively. This is in America. People are so brainwashed. They believe. Come over here, buddy. People are so brainwashed. They believe that we don't have the power, and the ruling class rigged elections, and we can't do nothing. We can't get Bernie elected. And I tell them, do you think rigged elections in the ruling class are something new? This has always been the case. We've always had rigged elections and systemic corruption in the ruling class, but somehow we expanded the vote. We have a constitution that guarantees equality for all. We have tons of civil liberties and labor protections that would not exist if the ruling class had real power. The reality is they only have an illusion of power, and they feed that illusion with this BS neoliberal lies and scare tactics that keep us all divided and fighting against our own public purpose. So once you learn MMT, or operational reality, you can really dissect and eat right through so many of these lies and scare tactics that keep us divided and unite in solidarity for the public purpose. One specific way I'm going to tell you how that happens is, in America, a big scare tactic of public spending and helping people is that their taxes are going to go up. Oh, you don't want that. You don't want that European style socialism. Your taxes will go up and our standard of living will go down. We'll all be dependent on the government. Well, first of all, we're all dependent on the government, as I already explained, as the currency issue, where if you have a job in America or you have income, you're dependent on indefinite federal spending and taxing and regulation for paid employment and income denominated in dollars. But more than that, you can tell them, look, your taxes do not have to go up to pay for nice things. This is why we have a constitution. Taxes don't fund the government. They serve other purposes. When it comes to think about it this way, dollars are just a law to satisfy taxation. Dollars are a law to organize labor and organize our economy. They have no intrinsic value. Their value is personal in that you can use a dollar to satisfy your tax and stay free. So the only thing that matters with fiat money, go in your room, buddy. The only thing that matters with fiat money is that the government makes the required public investments into our society and productive capacity to ensure that we have enough real resources created and available for any dollars in circulation to purchase. All right, so the government can never run out of money. Dollars are always infinite for the government. All that matters is our government spends dollars, the required amount of dollars, into our productive capacity, like public education, infrastructure, healthcare, because we need healthy, smart populations who are protected with green, sustainable energy to meet our needs of tomorrow. So that's the way that we keep our dollars valuable. It's by investing in productive ventures, investing in your society, in your productive capacity that ensures that you have enough real resources created and available for any dollars that are in circulation to purchase. That's it. So, and think about it this way. For single payer healthcare, let's say, all right, if you have the real resources available to meet the demand for any federal program, then our Congress, as the currency issuer, can always afford that program without raising taxes, without making cuts, without borrowing a dime. And it will always be non-inflationary spending. So what that means is if we have the doctors, the hospitals, and the medicine available to meet the demand for healthcare in America, then we can always afford that program in America. Stop, Rosario. If we have the hospitals, the doctors, and the medicine that we need to meet the demand for healthcare in America, we can always afford a single-payer healthcare plan without raising taxes, without borrowing a dime, and it'll be non-inflationary. It's all about meeting demand with supply. Don't let people lie to you and tell us that we can't have what we want, we can't have what we need. This is why I do what I do. I can't lie to myself. I can't leave him a future worse off without at least trying. I mean, I'm nobody special. We all have to do this.
All right. So, another question now. What do you think about all the overpaid CEOs while they're starved?
Wow, it's horrible. I mean, when you look at someone like Jeff Bezos, making more than, Bizarre, you got to stop. When you look at the obscene amounts that CEOs are taking home, and then you look at the fact that the majority of Americans are going without basic needs. They're working starvation wage environments. You have to go in your room, buddy. I'm almost done. Hold on 1 minute. Go in there and eat food at the table. I'll be done. I'll be with you in a minute. I'm going to have to cut it short, but I'm going to try and get to this.
That's fine.
The thing about this is, I think that we need to tax these people, but you have to keep taxing from spending separate. So we tax the excess wealth of the billionaire class to protect our democracy, to protect our public purpose. We never need to tax them to spend. And when people think that we do need to tax the rich so that we could spend on society, it's actually very counterproductive, because then you're going to accept artificial scarcity until government raises its revenues. And that's completely irrelevant. Government never depends on revenues. When the government bailed out the banks, 20-some trillion dollars, did you hear anybody saying the taxes were being raised?
No.
We've been spending trillions and trillions of dollars for the last decade, and no taxes have been raised, because the government it doesn't depend on taxes to spend. It writes a law, and dollars are spent into existence. Taxes are an afterthought. They're a way to deal with inequality. They're a way to incentivize or disincentivize behaviors. They're a way to, separate individual federal programs and evaluate the cost and benefits, like our Social Security program or highway program, all kinds of different things. But taxes never fund the federal government. So that just means we can always collectively force our federal government to spend the dollars required to buy up all unemployment and maximize our productive capacity with a federally guaranteed living wage job for everyone who wants one. That would meet people's needs with public goods and services that would raise everybody's standard of living. And then you wouldn't be precarious, dependent on the banks for credit to survive. So it would be, you wouldn't have all this craziness in the markets either. And you wouldn't have all the crazy bubbles and bursts that cause so much pain for the bottom either. We need to make our Congress spend the dollars required up front. Don't be afraid of public debt. The national debt is a fantasy. The national debt is a savings account. The national debt is a record of every dollar that's in existence. That's it. So the only way the national debt can burden us is if it's too small, not too big. If it's too small, meaning the federal government is starving us of dollars and targeting unemployment and forcing us into private credit just to live. I'm talking, buddy. You can't. I'm almost done. So, I want to do this again. But you know what? Let's try to keep doing it. I don't care if he's bothering me. I got these points pretty well down. So, what other questions do we got?
Insurance companies.
Insurance companies. Yeah. For healthcare, I suppose. Number one.
Yeah,
or just in general.
Like how would that work? Like, it just says, how
well,
about the insurance companies?
Yeah, well, the insurance companies, if you think about it, they're an appendage to healthcare production. That it's not a factor of healthcare production. All right, we could instead of spending like today, we spend through for-profit middlemen to provision society with healthcare. These for-profit middlemen, they don't contribute anything to healthcare production. All they do is make healthcare give you the least amount of healthcare for the most amount of money. So if our government instead just pays doctors and healthcare professionals directly, and you cut out that middleman, you lower the cost of healthcare overall. You could even pay doctors and healthcare providers better than they get now, and it would still be cheaper. And you could cover every single individual, and it'll still be cheaper up front, because all you're doing is getting rid of an appendage that doesn't help healthcare production. It only jacks up the price and lowers the quality of the service. Think about it, when you make an essential public good or a service like healthcare, private and for profit, you essentially guarantee that it cannot meet the needs of everybody in your society, especially when 60% of Americans, don't even have a savings account. They can't, they can't even deal with a $400 expense that pops up. Then you're ensuring that this for-profit healthcare cannot meet the needs of society. So you're ensuring you end up with millions of people that are suffering with treatable, preventable illness just for a lack of cash. It's sadistic. And people, when we look the other way and we become indifferent to all of this pointless human suffering and death over profit, that makes us callous. It makes us radicalized, and it makes society dog eat dog and cutthroat, for everybody. That brings everybody's standard of living down. If you want an empathetic, compassionate society, safe society where people care about each other, we can't deny millions of people the essentials to live. I don't care what the circumstances. I don't care what mistakes that person made. It's not about them. It's about our society. Do we want people that can't eat all over the streets? No, I want to be able to walk with my son to the playground without having to worry about being attacked by people starving to death. I don't care what mistakes they made. It's up to our government to provide for the general welfare of all, So I hope that answered it a little bit.
Yeah. So we have one more question, and then why don't we after that, why don't we finish by maybe comparing the federal job guarantee to a UBI? Yeah, the question is, what do you think of President Macron? And then maybe we could finish with that.
Well, I think he's a typical right-wing neoliberal, and I think that you guys, the yellow vests in France, are doing exactly what you need to do to force his hand and get the results that you need, get your public purpose met. And if you hold out, he's going to have to meet your needs. Hopefully you could even get him out of there, but I wouldn't call myself, I'm not really that educated on France politics. I just know he's a neoliberal in the mold of Obama or even Trump. Not Trump, but Obama and Bush. I will say he's a right-wing neoliberal that puts profit over people in society. There ain't nothing more I could say about him.
All right. Why don't we just conclude with comparing the federal job guarantee to the UBI?
Sure. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna do one more thing and then I'll be done, Rosario. Go in there and eat the tacos I made. Go in there and eat real quick. I'll be in a minute. So when people are talking about UBI, a lot of the things you'll hear is, well, it'll give people security and it'll allow them freedom from waged work so that they're not wage slaves. And they talk about it in these terms. And when I talk about it, I say this is a right-wing neoliberal Trojan horse, all right, because it does nothing that it claims. People will always be needed to produce all of the real resources that UBI will demand. All right. So first of all, there's always going to have to be there's always going to have to be people, making the real resources until AI takes over, which, that's nowhere close. But, for right now, it does nothing. The UBI does nothing. There's no mechanism to end involuntary unemployment. There's no mechanism to end starvation wages. All right, the federal job guarantee works because it ends involuntary unemployment by giving a federally guaranteed living wage job to everyone who wants one. And that maximizes our productive capacity to produce the stuff that, a basic income would buy. So what I say is you can't have a UBI standalone. It's bad. It's inflationary, meaning because it's just adding demand and not production, and it doesn't stop unemployment. It's going to be inflationary, meaning the amount of that UBI, the purchasing power is going to go down. And then you're going to be left with no social goods and services, because with the UBI, they want to do away with the safety net. So what I say is we can have a basic wage, but attach it to a federally guaranteed living wage job program. And again, I'm not saying this. This is what the experts are saying, the experts that I studied. I don't want to make it sound like I freaking come up with it, but we all learn from somewhere, but so the federal job guarantee, it ends the involuntary unemployment, and it ends the starvation wages that result from involuntary unemployment. All right. Now the UBI does nothing to do that. It just gives people money with no mechanism, no ladder out of poverty. And when inflation kicks in and the purchasing power of that money buys you much less, you're going to be worse off with less public goods and services to rely on. With a federally guaranteed living wage job program, you empower labor against capitalism. You give labor more collective bargaining power than any union in history through true full employment. When the government stands by, ready to give anybody a living wage job that wants one, that forces capital to redo their business model. That forces capital to truly value labor, or else they can't attract a labor workforce away from the federal job guarantee. So now you got a situation where capital can't pay starvation wages. They have to beat the federally guaranteed living wage job, or they can't attract the labor workforce. And so that provides a labor out of poverty. It sets the minimum wage at the living wage without even a mandate to the private sector. Again, just instituting the federal job guarantee program, it makes the capital have to beat that federal job guarantee to even get a workforce. So it provides that mechanism to empower labor at the bottom. Plus, it stabilizes our economy. The natural business cycle goes up and down, up and down. When it goes down, that means less people are buying goods and services. So capital will start to lay off people and start to lower production. And those people then lose their income, so they can't consume as much either. So it's a spiral, and then more production is idle. The capitalist will lay off more people, decrease even more production. And it's a downward spiral to the bottom. Only the currency issuing government can inject the currency needed to stop that downward spiral to the bottom. Right now, we do that with automatic stabilizers like welfare, unemployment insurance, this, that, the other thing. They're half measures. They don't work that well. People are suffering. Instead, when people are being laid off from the private sector, you have a public option with a living wage job guarantee. Then the people, they go into the public sector with a living wage job, honing their job skills. And now they have a living wage that they can keep their consumption up. So it would buffer the recessionary pressures, and it would protect the very bottom from the worst of the recessionary pressures. And then when the private sector starts to recover, they could start to hire people back out of the public sector job. So it's a balancing mechanism. It's a counterweight to the ups and downs of the business cycle.
Now, how would that work for people that can't work?
Wait, what's
now,
that?
How would that work for people that can't work?
Well, the people that can't work, if they're disabled or whatever, they would get the living wage. They should get disability. But that has to, again, that's basically what we got right now, Social Security. That's basically a UBI for people that are disabled or whatever. Not a UBI, but a BI, because it's not universal for everybody. It's just for disabled people or this and that. But there's some people, and I'm one of them, I say that we should give a basic income with the federal job guarantee to people who don't want to work, and that ain't going to be many people, because most people want to, climb up the social ladder. They want to contribute to society. That's how they define themselves. But if they don't want waged work, then we should give them enough to, a BI, a basic wage, maybe 2/3 of the living wage, just so that they have their basic needs met. And who knows, that extra freedom from waged work, that may result in something very socially valuable, like an artist making a work of art that inspires millions of other people or something like that. But the big point is here, it would have to be on an operational capacity. If too many people started to take that option and not work, it wouldn't work. We always need people to work and make all the stuff that everybody needs. You know what I mean? That's what people have to understand. That's the only way money has value. It's not the money isn't, it has no intrinsic value. It's how we organize our economy. The money always has to have enough stuff to buy. That's the simplest way I can put it.
That makes sense.
I would love to do this again, man, but my kid is driving me nuts, and I gotta
think we're out of
attend to him and
questions
feed
anyway.
him and stuff.
No, that was
What's that?
great, man. That was great, man. That was super informative. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adam. I appreciate what you're doing, man. Keep it up. Everybody,
You too.
we can do this. United in solidarity. They can't win. We have all the power. We need to stand in solidarity across the world with the yellow vests in France and all over the world to take our governments back and enforce the public purpose. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Check me out at Nonpartisans for Progress too. And I would love to come
The
back
link's on my wall.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back on tomorrow, whenever you want. Give me a call whenever you
Definitely,
get free.
man.
I just got to deal with the kid.
I feel you. Well, have a good night.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Peace.